Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore Indian thought, the nature of the thought of the Indian subcontinent. With me is Professor Kiran Kuman Salagame, who is the retired professor of psychology at the University of Mysore, former chair of the psychology department there. He is the vice president of the International Transpersonal Association, and he is author of The Psychology of Meditation, a Contextual Approach. Welcome, Kiran.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. And when we think of Indian thought, it's such a vast topic. It's amazing that one could discuss it at all. But I think it's important for our viewers and for ourselves to have an overview of this vast, ancient arena of consciousness. And after all, I guess we wouldn't be discussing the topic of Indian thought at all if it wasn't suspected, I think, by most people that there's something very unique about it.
Yes, it is unique. When we speak of Indian thought, we have to primarily consider three indigenous Indian traditions. Vedic tradition, which later is known as more as Hindu tradition. Then we have the Jain tradition, then the Buddhist tradition. So all these three traditions date back to several centuries, and modern historians, archaeologists, Indologists earlier traced it to Indus Valley civilization, roughly about 3,500 years. Now, they are pushing the date back as they get new evidences. So currently many say it's about 6,000 BCE. Okay. And some scholar even puts it at 10,000 BCE. But the Buddhist tradition has a definite date, somewhere between 400 and 500 BCE. So the Vedic and the Jaina tradition goes back to that.
One of the interesting things about the Indus Valley civilization, as I understand it, is it's very ancient. It's probably as old as any other known civilization on Earth, as old as the Sumerian or the Chinese or the Egyptian. But we don't understand, if I'm correct, their language. We don't have there are some written inscriptions, but I guess they've never really been translated.
It has not been deciphered yet. People are still, archaeologists are trying to decipher exactly the pictographs where they had some scripts, those earthen parts, and where they are trying to still put together many of those artifacts, and they are still trying to understand what exactly they meant. That is not understood. But what we know is Vedic Sanskrit is earlier to what today we call classical Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit can be taken as the beginning of the Indian literature. Mm-hmm. So, because we have a convention, like everything, all the ideas are traced back to Vedas. And Vedas, in our country, we believe that whatever that has come is not human creation. In Sanskrit, it is said Vedas are apaurushaya. That means Purusha means human, A means negating it. It is of a non-human origin. The other way of saying is it is of divine origin. What some of the people interpret it what it means is whatever Vedic hymns are there, they are some kind of a cosmic sound patterns, which some of the rishis received them. They cognized them. Okay. So that is how Vedic tradition has started, and Jaina tradition was contemporary.
The Jaina tradition is not in Sanskrit, is that right? It's a different language.
It's mostly in Pali, Prakrit, and other languages, which Magadhi, Ardha Magadhi, these were the local dialects of different regions in northern India, and most of them emerged from that dialect, not primarily from Vedic Sanskrit. But later on, there are some Sanskrit works authored by Jain saints and Buddhist saints also, Buddhist monks also.
And the Buddhist literature is in Pali.
Pali. Yes, it is in Pali. But there were some Sanskrit scholars even among them.
I mean, some people suggest that Buddhism was a reaction to the Vedic tradition.
Yes, it was a reaction in the sense that Gautama the prince, who later after his enlightenment is known as Buddha. Actually, the word Buddha is derived from Bodha. Bodha means awareness. So, one who got that highest awareness. So, he is Buddha. So, you see that once he got enlightened, by the time he got enlightened, he had already undergone all the kinds of practices that were prevalent both in the Vedic tradition and in the Jaina tradition. Mm-hmm. He was familiar with all that literature, all those practices. And he saw that there are some kind of extremes. Okay? Jainism going to the extreme of asceticism, negating the world completely, negating the material life. The Vedic tradition in the name of yajna, sacrificial rituals, going to the animal sacrifice and all, that was another extreme. So, Buddhist path is called middle path because he didn't want those excesses. He thought it is not necessary for that kind of enlightenment. And so, therefore, he was, against both the excesses. And he wanted people to be more humanistic, more loving, more compassionate, and live more as evolved human beings without getting into the, going after psychic powers or siddhis or going after achieving some other world, all that. So this was his path.
Now, of course, in ancient times, there were many different migrations that passed through the Indian subcontinent.
Yes.
So you had a great diversity of cultural influences. We talk about the Aryan invasion. We talk about the Dravidian people who were there prior to the Aryans and many other tribal groups and cultures in India.
Yeah, we do have many indigenous tribal groups in India. We also had many foreign invasions. There were earlier foreign travelers before the invasion took place. And there were definitely migrants also. But this Aryan Dravidian invasion theory, which is called, it has become very controversial. And there are people who say Aryans are native to India, and there are historians who say they immigrated from Persia, from Iran towards India. So there are differences of opinion, and it is one of the conflicting theories now. And I'm not a historian, And I cannot definitely take a position on that. I would suggest some historians or future researchers will decide that matter.
Well, one thing that seems kind of evident to me is that in the Vedic pantheon of gods, it's quite similar to the Greek pantheon in many ways, which suggests that, the Aryan people spread all the way between India and Greece at least.
And regarding the commonalities in the language, in the linguistic structure, there are certain linguists who have spoken about, Europe-Indian, that language family.
Yes.
So all that is there.
I mean, we find many Sanskrit words are recognizable in English.
Exactly.
Today in Hinduism, we hear about the three great gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Yes.
But in the ancient Vedic tradition, other gods are more dominant.
Yes,
so
correct.
How did that occur? How did Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva come to be recognized as the primary deities of the Hindu tradition?
It is again a story where centuries have passed, and it is from what I have read, you see that there is a clear difference between the Vedic sacrificial religion and the religion of the common folk, where they did some kind of a prayer and worship. Okay, this has been pointed out by Indologists, who have studied these two clearly. So, the Vedic gods are considered as powers of nature. And those powers of nature are personified. And the Vedic sacrifice centered around fulfilling the desires of life. It may be for a progeny, it may be for kingdom, it may be for wealth, or it may be for the afterlife. So, the sacrificial fire ritual, which is performed by Vedic tradition, considers fire god, Agni, as the mediator between the humans and the other powers, Varuna, Mitra, Marutas, and those Vedic deities who would bestow the boon for which you are giving them some kind of an alm through fire. So this is the basic idea. But if you come to the tribal folks, if you go to other common people, this kind of a Vedic sacrificial religion did not exist. It was more of supplicating. It was more of praying and offering flowers or fruits or something like that, or even some animals directly. And when we see this, we find that, in many parts of India, at least in southern parts of India, I am aware that the tribal kind of religious worship predominated for a long time. The Vedic tradition and Vedic sacrificial religion, Vedic mantras, they all came to southern part of India when the Jainism and Buddhism became dominant in northern part of India. And how when they came to southern India, this Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva and Vishnu's cults were already there. And the Shakti cult was also there. And these Vedic Sanskrit, rishis or scholars, they embraced either the Vishnu cult or the Shiva cult or the Shakti cult, or some accepted both Shiva and Vishnu. And that resulted in different kinds of worship, performance. Some of the Vedic mantras are, you superimposed upon the old kinds of practices of worship and these things. I was always intrigued when I attended some function, rituals and all. that you, on the one hand, you offer these things and also invoke some mantras from Taittiriya Upanishad or Purusha Sukta from some other Rigvedic tradition. I was always puzzled how they fit together, because they are representing different things. So I think this Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti cult predominated more in the southern part. Yeah. But I am not 100% sure about it, because it is there even in the northern India. For example, Kashmiri Shaivism. So I think it all spread, but definitely you can see two things. One, worshipping God directly. Another, you do something and seek boon through sacrifice rituals. So these two are distinct ways of understanding the spirituality, and Indian thought over hundreds of centuries have combined these two distinct ways of looking at reality.
If I was to try to get to the essence of Indian thought, it seems to be, if I had to put it in one word, I would say fusion. Because you've got the southern India, you've got the northern Indian traditions, they fuse together. You have the sacrificial traditions and the other more direct worship traditions fusing together.
Exactly.
You have the ascetic traditions and the traditions of expression in the world fusing together.
Yeah, that's exactly correct, because another Indologist, Dandekar, he speaks of two ways of life and two ways of thinking in the Indian tradition. He calls one as Rishi tradition, another as Muni Yati tradition. In the Rishi tradition, Rishis were householders. They had children. They were married. They enjoyed the material life to the brim. And there were also the Rishis who also dwelt upon transcendence. Whereas in the Muni and the Yati tradition, they were ascetics. They were the people who withdraw from, all the material way of living. So, the article I am referring to by Dandekar speaks of the Jaina influence on the Muni Yati tradition, so to say, and the Vedic influence of the Rishi tradition. And these Rishi and Muni Yati traditions, whatever good things are there, or whatever superstitious things that might have accrued over centuries, they have got fused together. They have kind of have become a compound in the chemical sense of the term. So what you see today as Hinduism in a broad way has elements from the Vedic tradition, some good things from the Jaina tradition, certain things from the Buddhist tradition also. See, take for example Buddha. Both Buddha and Jaina traditions are known to be atheistic. But you see what has happened in the Buddhist tradition. Buddha himself is made a god and he is worshipped with all the rituals. So you go to any Buddhist monastery or Buddhist temple, you have a whole pantheon of, his Buddhist. For Buddha, there were so many powers and all that.
Many deities.
Many deities,
but
exactly.
They're not thought of in the same sense as Westerners think of God, for example.
Yeah, but they are, in a way, they are parallel to what the Vedic deities are, powers, so to say. Yeah. I saw it in Shanghai. I visited Shanghai. So in the Buddhist temples, I saw all of them represented, all those powers. So now Buddha himself did not speak of any religion in that sense, any rituals. He was always trying to speak about living, with compassion and trying to go beyond. But later on, when the Buddhist tradition developed after 200 years, when they, brought together all the teachings and they systematized it and they classified it, slowly, different denominations developed. I understand that, whether it is Buddhist, whether it is Jaina, or whether it is Vedic. There are idealists, there are realists, and there are pluralists, all kind of ontological positions they have taken, and you find similarities in schools. So I think when you take Indian thought, you have to see finally, conceptually, what ontologies and what epistemologies all these schools have accepted. Because one of the professor of philosophy, Indian philosophy, by name Hiriyanna, he is internationally known as a philosopher of standing. He says Indian tradition accepted what we call pramana. Epistemology is called pramana shastra. That means valid means of obtaining knowledge. So perception, inference. Okay. Charvakas accepted only perception and inference.
Now, Charvaka we should define.
Yeah, Charvaka are the materialist schools who are equivalent of present-day positivists, orthodox thinking, who believe only in material reality.
And they're very ancient.
Yeah, and Charvakas was a group of thinkers who were very ancient, who lived contemporaneously in the Vedic period itself. But their world view did not dominate the Indian thinking.
It was never dominant, but it was always present.
It was always present. Mm-hmm. And all the people who held to the spiritual worldview referred to them as the opponents and give some statement about what they believed, what their teaching was. Mm-hmm. That's how we still consider Charvak as a darshana. In Indian tradition, the Indian thought traditions are called darshanas. Darshana means vision and perspective. You get some idea of, it's a worldview. In the present day language, it's a worldview. So, all the Indian tradition, be it Vedic, Jaina or Buddhist, have a spiritual worldview. But it is not necessary that they believed in creationism, in a God creating. Jaina and Buddhists do not speak of any God, whereas the Vedic tradition speaks of the God, deities.
Yes.
So, again you go to the Shiva, Vishnu and all. You have both concrete representation of Shiva and Vishnu or Brahma, and you also have an abstract transcendental understanding as principles. So it is a very complicated system.
Another duality that you have written about that really struck me, because India has such a profound philosophical tradition, but there's also a folk tradition. And you point out that really amongst the people of India, the philosophical ideals seem to be embedded in the folk, but most people practice the folk religion, not the philosophical.
Exactly, because you see that in India, today, in the psychological literature, particularly in the Western literature, there is a clear distinction made between religion and spirituality. When you say religion, the definition is it is an organized faith with certain customs, rituals, practices, which you follow, and you adhere to a particular ideology or faith or something like that. Whereas spirituality is defined as an attempt to connect with something broader, something bigger, something cosmic, trying to realize the ultimate nature of self like that. So if you go back and study the Indian traditions, you find that you have both. You have the spirituality in India, you have the religion in India. But they have been together. That is the problem. And if you take the spiritual literature, particularly the Upanishads, it is very clear as far as what is the distinction between the religiosity and the spirituality. Okay. But for the common people, the elements of spirituality is integrated, in a way brought down. So you ask any Indian, we have certain common beliefs, understanding regarding law of karma, rebirth, the possibility of Atman as the real, identity, a belief in a soul which takes different births. All these are there. They are mentioned in the Upanishads also. They are in the Veda, that idea is there. But there is a religious part to it of supplicating to God. So, we have a concrete level and an abstract level. And it is not just my observation. It is an observation by a philosopher who wrote outlines of Indian philosophy somewhere in 1902 or 8. P.T. Srinivas Iyengar, whom I have quoted, I think, in that article you are referring to. He says, though Indians have gone abroad and have tried to project Vedanta as the Indian true religion or religion of India, when it comes to actual practice of common people, it is the religious faith and ritual that predominates. This is not my statement. Yeah. It is a statement of a person made some 100 years ago. So, the religion is usually called agama. Agama means that which has come from immemorial. It's not subjected to scrutiny, inquiry. It is more an article of faith. Whereas Shastra, which is called Upanishads and all, they are Vedas, and Shastra is subject to inquiry. So, we have more of faith, less of this.
Because millions of people will show up at the various festivals.
Yes.
But only a fraction of those people will actually engage in the intellectual study of the Upanishads and the Vedas.
Yes. That is because, primarily because of 2-3 reasons. As I guess, it's only a guess. One is, you see, the understanding of Upanishads necessarily requires you an ability to go beyond your cognitive ability. If you take the Piagetian stages, for example, much of the adult thinking is supposed to stop at formal operational thought, right? Yeah. And the scientific attitude is associated with an as-if proposition. And, so we are speaking of those 4 stages of intellectual cognitive development. But there are 2 stages of development of cognition beyond the Piagetian thinking. One is called dualistic thought, another is called unitary thought. And transcendence is beyond the unitary thought. Okay. So, at the thinking level itself, there are higher stages. And if you look at it from that point of view, the Vedanta is supposed to be emerging from a unitary level of thought. And Sankhya is supposed to have been developed from the dualistic level of thought. And the other thinking, the reductionist paradigm has come from the formal operational level. I read it all in a book, probably you are also aware of it. It came somewhere around 1983 or 5, Psychotherapy East and West, a unifying paradigm by Swami Ajaya, who was an American clinical psychologist and became a disciple of Swami Rama. If you look at the Indian tradition has come from dualistic and unitary thought. Mostly. And therefore, for a common man to get to that may be a difficult proposition. But if somebody has an inclination towards these things, that means their cognitive development must have gone beyond that. So, Therefore, in India, we have a large mass of people who have a particular way of thinking or approach to reality. And maybe these people were exceptional people who had developed that, who had those experiences.
Well, I think partially what you're suggesting is that the common person in India who may never have studied Vedanta or even the detailed teachings of Buddha and the great philosophies of Shankara and so on will have an appreciation of mantra, an appreciation of just the power of syllables, of sound itself.
Yes, that is one way of looking at it. Mm-hmm. You see, you have been given a package. You follow this, okay, to make your life convenient. But in the Indian tradition, you are also told very clearly, this package is not the ultimate. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when some type of worship is told, some mantra is given, that is for daily living. You have to follow this. Yeah. But that is only a path to connect with something higher. Mm-hmm. But that may not be appreciated by everybody, or may not be possible for everybody to go beyond certain limits. Here is the psychology of individual differences. Okay. I don't mean to say somebody is low or somebody is high. I'm not making any judgment about it. What I'm saying is, it is a question of different abilities, because it is not necessary that to experience transcendence, one should have had any formal training in any religious doctrine or anything. The person need not have been born even in a higher caste or anything. I take two contemporary examples. See, one was Ramana Maharshi I was referring to. Ramana Maharshi was supposed to have been born in a Brahmin caste, which is known as the upper caste, who were the repository of all the Vedic Upanishadic lore. He himself had not studied anything of that except whatever religious practices he was exposed to. But one day he had what he later called a death experience. Suddenly he says some fear developed in me that I'm going to die. And he says he enacted how a death person will be. He had seen some corpse and all. And he says within flash of seconds, I got an insight that I and the body are different. And that was it. It was first and last experience. And after that, he lost interest in his 9th grade studies, and then he leaves his place, his uncle's place where he was. He goes away to Thiruvannamalai, and he lived there for more than 50 years. And for the 2-3 years immediately, he always used to be in another state. So later, many people interpreted he went to higher state, came back and all. But he clarifies, no, that one experience was the ultimate experience. There was no question of going up and coming down. It was stable, but I was drawn inward. Okay. So that, and only gradually he came back to external reality. You see, there was no formal schooling or training as far as these matters are concerned. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is another. Okay. Now you take Mata Amrutanandamayi, hugging saint, who is known as Amma. Yeah. Okay. You take her. Where was she? She was born in a fisherman's family. Okay? Fisherman's family, they made their living by fishing. She had no higher caste background. Nobody studied any Upanishad or Vedas in her family. she got some, and she hardly studied up to 4th or 5th standard, but she is a world spiritual leader today. Everybody flocks after her. She had that experience. So what does it show? It shows that this experience has nothing to do with your religion, your caste, your formal education, your upbringing, or anything. It is independent of all that, and to whom it happens, we don't know. So you take the rishis. Even in the rishis, there were people of all categories, all varnas, as they called.
All varnas?
Varna. Earlier, what you call caste system today.
The caste system.
That is different.
Yeah.
The word varna was used more as a classificatory scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the verse in the Bhagavad Gita says, where Krishna says, I have created the 4 varnas based on guna and karma. Guna means what quality, what principle, predominates, and what action you do. Based on that, I made a classification.
Mm-hmm.
When he says I made, he doesn't mean Krishna, the son of Vasudeva and Devaki. It is not that. He is speaking as Vishnu, the divine.
Mm-hmm.
So, the point is, experience is first. It can happen to anybody on earth. Later, the experiences have accumulated and have created a body of knowledge, which is spiritual.
Well, one of the unique features, it would seem to me, of Indian culture is the ability to recognize that I'll call it charisma in people like Anandamaya Ma, the daughter of a fisherman who's become a world spiritual figure.
Yes, that is the point. So now, that kind of level of consciousness, shall we say level of awareness, we had more of that in the ancient time. If you take Aurobindo's book on the Vedas,
mm-hmm.
what Aurobindo has written is, there was an age of intuition in the Vedic period. By the time Upanishads came, it was already an age of intellect. And then the schools, what we call philosophical systems, which developed,
mm-hmm.
Around 500 BC or later on, all those Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, all those schools, what we call today Indian philosophical systems, by the time, even, it was more of sensory experience and reasoning and logic. And he says, the very structure of the psyche of people itself went on shifting from one age to another.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you read the chapter on the development of, Indian thought tradition. I have also mentioned about the sociologist Pitrim Sorokin.
Yes, one of my intellectual heroes, incidentally.
Yes, so well then that in his books on socio-cultural dynamics, he has very clearly written that, all the societies have passed through certain eras, and then he speaks of the sensate era.
Yeah.
He speaks of 3 outlook or mental outlooks like sensate, idealistic, and ideation.
Yes.
And he has given the description.
Yes.
And he says, Western culture is in the last phases of the sensate era.
Yes, the decaying portion of the sensate era.
Yes. So, the sensate era is the one where the empirical, reason and sensory apparatus becomes predominant.
Yes.
And the ideational is where you speak of the spiritual and all that belief and all that.
Yes.
Idealistic is some kind of an integration of that.
Yes.
So if you keep a Sorokinian framework and look at the Indian thought, for example, I see that, we had the sensate mentality, the ideational mentality, and the idealistic mentality simultaneously existing at different stages. That is why you see Charvaka was allowed. They are completely sensate. Okay. The Vedic rishis were there who were more ideational. And the Upanishadic rishis, I would say more idealistic, who sort of combine the sensate and the thing. And you look at the Indian diaspora within India, you look at how we have the tribals in the Andaman Nicobar Islands who remain as aboriginals, whom anthropologists describe lived as primitive people.
And they're protected today.
They are protected. But they still live that way only. Okay? And we also have the Vedantic rishis who have realized the Vedantic truth. So you have people with different kinds of mentality, with different levels of awareness. And there is a whole spectrum in India today. If you just go around India, you will find people who reject all these things, the people who accept all these things. You can't pin down. So, and why I think it is because in the Rig Veda, there is a famous statement again. I am attracted. Ano Bhadra. It says, let the noble thoughts come from all the sides. Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwataha. It comes from all the sides. Let the noble thoughts come from all the sides. This is a Rigvedic dictum. So our rishis invited the noble thoughts from all the sides. They allowed all streams of thinking to flourish. So we have all the shades.
Well, and you yourself embody another unique perspective, someone with Western education, a psychologist trained in the empirical methods of science, endeavoring to integrate that with these ancient traditions.
Yeah, initially I had conflicts. As I told you in the morning, when I was brought to the notice that the Upanishads have a different dimension, and the Indian psychology emerges from that, I did have a conflict for a couple of years, how to reconcile the two. But that reconciliation process happened, through reflection, through meditation, some of my own little experiences. And slowly I realized that they need not be contradictory. They are speaking different facets, so that it can be, both can coexist. So I have nothing against Western psychology. I respect Skinner as much I respect Shankara. Skinner has some valid points of operant conditioning, reinforcement, which is important. Okay. Shankara has spoken about Advaita Vedanta, which is important. But each has its place. Each is relevant at certain level. And with whom, to whom that is required is important. Because if I have to tell you, I gave behavior therapy, systematic desensitization to a monk who was wearing the ochre robe. He came with the phobia of snakes. As a clinical intern, I was working in the behavior therapy unit, and he was referred to me. I gave him systematic desensitization. He used to wear, the bandage the orthopedic clinicians give you to wear the bandage around your thigh. He was wearing that kind of thing. I asked him why. He said, I'm afraid of snakes. So I gave him relaxation, Jacobson relaxation. I took him through systematic desensitization procedure. I removed his fear, so he removed that band from his hand. That was as a clay.
So
you see now.
Skinner was very useful.
Yes.
And Jacobson.
yes, definitely. He is operant conditioning is a principle.
Well, that's part of the beauty, I think, of Indian culture in general. Nothing is foreign. To you. Everything can be integrated. I know many Hindus, people consider Jesus Christ as part of their religion.
Exactly. Jesus is a avatara. Because we have the concept of avatara. The divine can incarnate anywhere on earth as a human being. Buddha is an avatara, Jesus is also an avatara. Why? What has he taught? He has taught love, peace, humanity. Okay, you find love, peace and humanity in the Vedic tradition too. So how different it is in the sense that why should I disrespect him?
So there is this all-embracing sense, which is part of Hindu culture. I think it's very admirable.
Let the noble thoughts come from all the sides. This is a Rigvedic statement. It is a statement, it's a part of a hymn in the Rigveda. Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwataha.
Let the noble thoughts come from all sides. Kiran Kuman Salagame, thank you once again so much for this wonderful exposition of Indian thought.
Thank you very much. I am so pleased that I am able to share some of my thinking with you. Thinking aloud.
Yes, thinking aloud. And thank you for being with us.